not got a seat, just want to come and sit down. So I want to welcome everyone. We've got zero carbon people, we've got fair trade people. I think we've got fair traders from York, Leeds, Skipton, Keighley. So we've drawn quite a lot of people in. In some senses it's two completely separate groups, which is zero carbon, people who care about climate change, people who care about fair trade. In actual fact, we've all got the same cause. And if anyone is not really sure about that and thinks that we're not the common cause, I hope you'll change your view by the end of Robin's talk this evening. I'm the manager of Harrogate Fair Trade Shop. I'm also a member of Zero Carbon Harrogate. Because I read a lot about fair trade all the time, I've become a lot more aware about how awful it is for people in poorer countries day to day who are facing climate change now. So for me, it's a very present issue within fair trade. I think it's time that we've started really opening our eyes to what's happening and started to become part of the solution, not part of the problem. Some of you will have heard all the things that have happened with tradecraft over the last year or so. And I know some of you may want to ask questions about that afterwards. I think Robin's going to talk for half an hour and then we'll have time for questions, so you can ask them whatever you like. Tradecraft and Harrogate Fair Trade Shop are in the same fair trade network, which is great because it's a fantastic network and we all support each other. And I know Tradecraft has been very much supported by RAFs when they were going through difficulties. At conference in May, which is a fantastic time when we all get together and swap stories and hear talks and everything, surrounded by loads of very enthusiastic people from within the world of fair trade. I realised that it was Tradecraft who were the ones who were really ahead of the game when they were thinking about climate change. They were the ones that were thinking about how we need to change how we look at fair trade, change how we look at the whole of the world, change how we look at trade and individual behaviour. And I think that Tradecraft were one of the pioneers of fair trade in this country. We started 40 years ago. Robin's got his 40 years of Tradecraft t-shirt on. So it seems appropriate that Tradecraft are the ones that are still thinking ahead and thinking differently on what fair trade means and what it's going to mean in the future. So I hand over to Robin.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Forgive me that I was just playing with my phone there. I wasn't looking at the cricket score or anything. That someone asked me to record tonight, so that I just put it on record. That's the reason. Thank you so much for the invitation. I feel almost certainly that you know more about everything I'm about to say than I do. And I have spoken before to mixed groups and been regularly corrected on my science, on my history, on my geography, on my chemistry, on virtually everything. It's very humbling to be with a community of people who care passionately. And I suspect if I were to go around and ask each one of you about your engagement in social justice or trade justice or climate justice, I think by the end of that I'd just need to sit down and take a breather, because the accumulated knowledge and wisdom and experience in this room is heavy. Yeah. It's lovely to be in a Quaker meeting house as well, because historically the Quakers have always had a passion for trade and economic and social justice, and I feel very well in their communities. So anyway, I'm not going to go on for too long about background. I'm going to start straight off with something that my daughter said to me at the breakfast table about 3 months ago. She said to me, "Dad, there's only one thing I really despise you for." I thought, this is going to be a very interesting day. She said, "Dad, really you're a nice dad, but your nose is enormous." And I said, "Well, that may be, but why do you despise me for it?" She said, "Well, it's in my DNA now." And I said, "Well, love, you're beautiful, and sadly you haven't inherited my nose." To which she said, "I know I'm beautiful, Dad, that's not the point. But what do I tell my children when they inherit your nose?" Having a teenage daughter is it's a great joy. It's a great joy for me. It's making me young and making me realise how white middle-aged males have a certain sense of privilege that they do not even know they have. And I see all the women nodding. So a week or two ago, I was thinking about this, and I thought I'd ask my daughter the reverse question. I said, "Love, is there anything that you would like me still to do before I die that would help you not to despise me for anything else?" And she shot out with 2 answers immediately. And I'm not going to tell you what they are until the end, and I'll probably forget to tell you. So remind me in the questions if I haven't. But it was fascinating, her response. Young people have a very, very different view of issues that we care passionately about, and they see them through a different prism. So I'm going to talk today about all sorts of things. I hope this isn't overwhelming. I hope you don't find it boring. I'll try and make it fairly quick. And we're going to rattle through some science, some chemistry, some sex. Yeah, because if you don't, no one will stay around for the 3rd series. We're going to talk about fair trade, we're going to talk about trade justice, we're going to talk about what works, and above all, we're going to talk about hope. Because Martin Luther, that jolly German theologian, of whom there are many, no, actually there's only one, and it's Luther. Luther was a man who loved life. He just adored life. He married a nun, and they had numerous children. He broke every rule going. When he was asked what he would do if he knew that Christ were coming tomorrow, in other words, if the world were going to end, he said, "I would still plant my apple tree today." And I love that. I love that. Even if he knew tomorrow's catastrophe, today he plants his apple tree. And we're going to come back to trees quite a lot, actually, because I love trees. I'm a tree hugger. So, I know we've got lots of people from the zero carbon community, but for those who aren't, this is perhaps a bit for you. This is a map of the world showing how much carbon we produce each year. On my screen it's beautifully coloured, up there it isn't, but I wanted just to point out that Great Britain, even though we're a relatively small country, we produce rather too much carbon compared with the rest of the world. When people talk about carbon justice, this is what they're talking about, the fact that we are carbon rich. We spend carbon like you wouldn't believe it. I'm going to come back to what carbon is, because at the moment you're thinking, I don't spend carbon, but you do. More interestingly, if you look back in history, it's a similar picture. If you look back at history, Great Britain is one of the great carbon polluters in human history. Until about 1928 or 29, Great Britain on its own was the single biggest emitter of carbon in history. Small country. By 1930, we were the single biggest emitter of carbon in history, thanks to the Industrial Revolution and everything that happened over in Lancashire. It didn't affect the Yorkshire people at all. You were perfect, weren't you? You were living in rural, agricultural harmony with the planet and with God. Those damned Lancastrians, they were making a mess of it all. I'm originally from Manchester, so I can say that. We have an historical burden. We carry guilt, actually. A lot of the problems that we're now beginning to face started a few miles away from here. But even today, we are still, each one of us, producing about 6 or 7 tons of carbon. Now, I know that doesn't mean anything. Don't worry. I'm going to show you what carbon looks like in a minute. You're going to visually understand carbon. We are still emitting, spending, if you will, more carbon than most other nations in the world. There are some outliers, as you'd expect, the United States. Just to put this all into context, the world average carbon footprint is about 1.5 tons, a bit less. In sub-Saharan Africa, we're where they don't get the opportunity to spend it, it's about half a tonne. In New York, it's about 9 tonnes. In Wyoming, it's over 100 tonnes. Don't ask me why. I'm not sure what the people of Wyoming do, but there is a huge discrepancy. Saudi Arabia, you'll notice, is a huge emitter of carbon per capita because they're producing so much. Does this matter? Half of you know the answer. Half of you are wondering what on earth I'm talking about because you thought it was about fair trade. Don't worry, we'll get to fair trade. Is this. When I say 1.5 degrees, does that mean anything? Is that a concept, 1.5? Some of you are nodding, some of you aren't. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, where all the nations of the world meet together to try and deal with the issue of global warming, have said that unless we limit global average temperatures to 1.5 degrees or less above pre-industrial levels, then we're in trouble. I'll tell you how much trouble in a minute. But 1.5 is our maximum limit if we want this planet to sustain us. 1.5. So that's from 1850, roughly, to today. If temperatures go up by more than 1.5 degrees, we have a problem. Let's see the scores on the doors. If we do nothing, if we continue effectively as we have been, by the end of this century, when I'm dead, and it doesn't matter to me, but when my grandchildren are in their prime, we will be at 4.1 to 4.8 degrees above pre-industrial levels. 1.5 means we can avoid catastrophe. We're heading for 4.1 to 4.8. If we enacted all the policies that governments around the world have promised, you remember Theresa May just before she went? She had a moment of inspiration and said we're going to be carbon neutral by 2050. Well, if that was somehow to be put into effect, it would only be 3.1 to 3.7. That sounds good. If we were actually to implement all of the pledges that the nations of the world have already committed, if they were actually to do it, all the nations of the world, it would only be 2.6 to 2.2 degrees. This comes from the scientists. This is not something I've made up. I'm not very good with graphs anyway. If you want to know more about the science at the United Nations, it is thousands of scientists reviewing scientific research papers every year, presenting them to the United Nations, where about 12 or 14 scientists who are unpaid and therefore not lobbyable collate the science and present reports. This is hard science now. This isn't with any agenda. It is truly scientists saying what's going on. Why is 1.5 important? Well, at about 1.5, certain things will happen in the environment that will have bad effects. One of them is that the permafrost in Siberia, which is holding in billions, if not trillions of tons of methane, will start to melt, releasing methane into the atmosphere. Methane is 23 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. 23 times. So 1.5 degrees starts triggering certain things. The other thing that would start to trigger at about 1.7 to 2 degrees is the entire ice sheets, north and south, will melt. Slowly, possibly, but they will melt. Now that will create certain problems for about 60% of the world's population who live within 2 meters of sea level. So that's why 1.5 is important. It's not like, let's choose a number. The scientists are saying, if we don't do it, we've got a problem. But remember Martin Luther, let us not get caught in a cycle of we can't do anything. Let us today plant our apple tree. And I'm going to say why apple trees are important. So where I have been living recently in Germany, funnily enough in Bonn, which is where the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change meets, half the city is forest. It's the only city in the world where half of the city is forest. I think they did that just by drawing a line around a forest outside the city, but it is a wonderful city to live in. And up in the forest, the local city council had a brilliant idea. Instead of taking away trees that had fallen down or had to be felled, they left them all over the forest. This tree is 1.2 tons of carbon. I told you I'd tell you what carbon looks like. That's 1.2 tons of carbon. Remember, each of you and me, we spend about 6 tons of this stuff every year. So our footprint, if you will, is 4 or 5 of those each per year. I don't mean that if you burn it, that's the energy. That's solid carbon locked in the earth, not in the sky. Yeah? And that represents how much each one of you and I spend on heating or fuel or petrol each year. It's helpful, isn't it, just to, all right, every time I get in the car and don't take the bike, and I know a number of you have come by bike this evening, we're doing this. We are taking carbon from the earth and pumping it up there into a great soup that is heating us. How about this one? If you fly to Mallorca and back, one person, that's 0.5 ton of carbon. And each person in the plane is getting through 0.5 ton of carbon. You could alternatively travel 13,000 kilometres by train. Choices. It's choices, isn't it? We don't have to do this, but we choose to. How about this one? That is about 900 kilograms, or 890, of carbon dioxide. That's when you buy clothes. That's your yearly clothing allowance. Whew. Go to Oxfam. I think they're doing September, this isn't it? It's a second-hand month? Second-hand September. Yeah, I couldn't believe this because all I seem to buy are underpants and socks, fair trade. And every jumper I buy is taken by my daughter, who still despises me for the size of my nose. And how about this one? 762 kilograms, that's how much carbon you pump into the atmosphere if a family of 4 eats meat. Scary, isn't it? Scary. So when the United Nations talks about changing your diet and the way you eat, and finally we're getting to fair trade. Don't worry, if you're here for fair trade, don't worry. The way we choose to consume is part of the solution. So just out of interest, are there any vegans here? Bless you, bless you, and bless you, because you are not spending carbon the way the rest of us are. How many vegetarians are there? Yeah, I'm one of them. The United Nations, interestingly, has said that the best diet, really, if you are serious about climate change, go vegan. No questions, don't think about it, just do it. And that's really hard, isn't it? The second best option is not vegetarianism, it's flexitarianism. A little bit of meat, a little bit of dairy, produced locally and organically. And I'm going to come back to both those phrases again later on. Because most vegetarians make up for their lack of meat by drowning themselves in milk and cheese and yogurt. And dairy, meat production, very similar problems. So, if you take away nothing else this evening, apart from a Tradecraft brochure to order some new things, go and become vegans or flexitarians. The way we consume is our choice, not Boris Johnson's. Thankfully. And you don't need Parliament to pass any laws. So, when we talked about trees and planting one, this is what stops us at the moment from living in an environment that is hostile to human life. All that carbon over many, many millennia, hundreds of millions of years, is stored in the earth through the process of trees capturing carbon, dying, and that carbon being sequestered into the earth. At the moment, the earth is a carbon sink. The more we dig it up, the more we burn it, the more we turn it into a problem. Forest. I love forests, I really do. Have you any idea how much of this country is still covered by forest? Here's a nice question. Anyone like to guess?
3%.
It was 3% after the war. The war we just decimated. I'm talking about England now. But do you have any idea what it is now?
It's 13 or 14%.
Yeah, it's 13-14% over the whole of the UK, but England is 10%, Scotland is 14% because of all the plantations. If you and I wanted to offset our carbon every year, 6 tons, we would each one of us individually have to plant 1,000 trees. One tree in its first year sucks in 6 kilograms. 6 tons, 6 kilograms, 1,000. To do that, we would each need 3 acres of land. There isn't that much land in the UK, which is another way of saying we are living beyond our means, far beyond our means. In fact, we are importing carbon from other countries. The Amazon, we're still all living at the moment still off the Amazon. We are using other people's forest to live our crazy, over-consuming lifestyle. So either we have to go out and start planting trees, because at the moment, the UK's forests absorbs only about 5% of our total emissions. We're out by a factor of 20 to 1. Either we need to start planting a lot of trees, and I'm thinking at Tradecraft of every order that we send out a tree with it, and you've got to illegally plant it somewhere, or we start spending so much carbon. And now I want to talk about, well, before I do, this is the bench that I sit on at home when I'm pondering Martin Luther. Most benches look out on a view, don't they? I love this one because it looks out on trees. Because trees are what will save us, and are what are saving us now. But how we as humans love to clear the forests and have great vistas and views, as if we were kings of the earth, when really we should be animals living in the forest, because they sustain us. I'm going to tell you a story of hope. Does anybody know who this woman might be? I'd be very surprised, because in the United Kingdom, she's unknown. But when I was working for a fair trade company in Germany, before I joined Tradecraft, I worked for a company called Gieper, which is the biggest fair trade company there. It's a bit like Tradecraft. It was the pioneer. It invented fair trade. She came to visit one day, and I had no idea who she was. But I knew there was something special, because everybody else in the building was going, oh, she's coming, she's coming, she's coming. Anyway, this lovely, grandmotherly Indian lady walked in with a beautiful sari, which she calls her 12 yards of freedom. She says, doesn't matter what's going on underneath, it just covers me. It's wonderful, a beautiful, liberated woman who is passionate about many things. She was there to sell us rice, fair trade rice. Now, let's talk fair trade. When she sold rice to Gieper, when producer organisations in the Global South sell products to companies like Tradecraft, it is a life-saving transaction for them. I'm going to explain why. She came to sell us 3 containers of GMO-free rice. GMO is obviously a concept, but if I were to challenge you, I suspect not many of you would really be able to, well, some of you probably know it very well, but we all know GMO is somehow bad. This woman became famous for taking Monsanto and Bayer regularly, frequently, and delightfully to court for their attempts to patent the DNA of rice and cotton. She is a serial litigator. Monsanto hate her. If you go online and look at her name, Vandana Shiva, you will see 2 types of blogs. She is the saviour of mankind, she is the devil. And if you look at the impression, who writes these blogs, you'll see who's who. She divides opinion. Her beef was that Monsanto and Co. were patenting the DNA of rice, changing it, and turning that rice into terminator seed. Terminator seed. Does anyone know what that is? Okay. Brilliant idea, superb invention, big companies, they give you the seed, they sell it to you, you plant it. Most farmers normally hold back a bit of seed for next year. But if you do that and you plant it, it dies. Genius. The best marketing ruse you can imagine. And not only that, these companies are brilliant at creating pesticides which you need for that particular strain of rice. So you have to buy the rice, you have to buy the pesticide, and would you believe it, they also offer the fertilizer that only seems to work with that crop. So you buy that as well. And can you believe it, they have a credit organisation that lends you the money to do it. When you hear about 250,000 Indian cotton farms committing suicide since the 1970s because of debt, it's because of these people. Vandana loves taking them to court, and she's successfully sued them on many occasions. So when I asked her after the meeting, we sold 3 containers of rice to her, I happened to sit in the taxi with her going to a conference, and I said, Vandana, how important is fair trade to you and your farmers? And what she said nearly blew me away, because I was CEO of one of the world's largest fair trade companies. I was convinced that fair trade was the answer, and she said to me, about 9th on the list. And I was deeply insulted. Deeply, deeply insulted. I just bought 3 containers of GMO-free rice at a vastly inflated price. And she told me that actually what we were doing was about 9th on the list. And then without a pause, she rattled out the other 8. And I can only remember the first 4. I wish my brain wasn't so spongy. But she said, health of the soil, the fact that the farmer's wife, her well-being, her health, and her water supply and her sanitary conditions are good, ditto her children, and fourthly, seed sovereignty. I didn't understand it at the time, but I do now, or I think I do. What I've begun to understand is that fair trade pays for a lot of what makes a really successful community. It isn't in itself the answer, it's just a means for farmers to be able to pay for what they really need, which is healthy soil. She has a very interesting business plan. She collects seeds from all the farmers in the hills round about. She collects them and she interbreeds them to protect their sovereignty. You can't DNA the thousands of seeds that she has. Then she gives them away to local farmers. She gives the seeds away to local. I'll say that again. She gives the seeds away. Think of Monsanto and what they do. She gives them away with the condition that they give her 5% or 10% back at the end of the harvest, so that she can replant them in her farm, crossbreed them again, and create such diversity that Monsanto is always going to be racing after her. She has thousands of rice seeds and millet seeds and grain and barley and chickpea and lentil, so many that if Monsanto tried to patent all of them, even if they could get their hands on them, they'd be doing it from now till doomsday. Her farm is nothing more than a huge seed bank. I went into her store, thousands and thousands of tools. She could do that because of fair trade. She said to me later, you guys bankroll my ability to change the world. I'd always thought we changed the world. That's arrogance. Farmers change the world. Producers change the world. A few years ago I had a nervous breakdown. You can probably imagine why, because the way I talk, I burnt out, and the first thing I did when I was well enough was to go and visit her farm. And I sat there for a week, just breathing in everything she did, just breathing it in. And of course, if you spend time with farmers who are involved with a circular economy, putting goodness back into the earth, your whole relationship with the earth changes. It just changes. That's why I like being in forests. You are literally nourished by the air and the seed and the life around you. Because that's a difficult story to tell. It explains why, for me, fair trade is an act of genius and brilliance. It's the idea of giving farmers actually what they need to be able to live the lives they want to plan, not the one I think they should. I remember the very first time I worked for fair trade, hearing about a group of producers. Are you okay? Okay. They were workers on a plantation, and their decision with the first premium money was to buy Samsonite cases and chains. And I thought, why on earth would farmers want to buy Samsonite cases with chains? And when they explained that they have to go and work for 8 hours in the field, they live in dorms, and their families live 1,000 miles away, they just want somewhere to be able to lock away their earnings. Well, I would never have thought of that. But if you allow people to make their own decisions about their own lives, they come up with the most amazing things. Now, here's the villain of the piece. Bit of chemistry. Told you it'd be a bit of chemistry? Because the way you and I eat food, whether it's zero packed or not, is a criminal offence against nature. This man is called Fritz Haber, a German scientist, 1913, who looked at the way food was produced, and he said, you know, food needs basically 3 things to grow: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Without those 3, we will never be able to get more food out of the earth. In fact, he said, agricultural husbandry essentially maintains the balance of bound nitrogen. That's a bit technical. The world is full of nitrogen, the atmosphere, 78% of it, but actually nitrogen in the earth, which we need and is there by nature, is very rare. It can only get there by 3 means. 1, when you and I die and our body decomposes, a bit of nitrogen will leach back into the earth. 2, certain plants, peas and legumes, exchange a bit of sugar for a bit of nitrogen from beetles. Bizarre. Thirdly, lightning. When lightning strikes the air, it heats the air to thousands of degrees, nitrogen atoms split, they fall in the rain as nitrates. That's how nitrogen comes to, not a lot of it is there. This guy found a way of distilling nitrogen out of thin air in the Haber-Bosch process. And just to prove I do know my chemistry, that's the formula. If it doesn't mean anything to you, it doesn't mean anything to me either. And there's the science bottom right. He managed to create fertilizer. He also was the person who, using the same techniques, created chlorine gas and mustard gas and led the first chemical attack on the Western Front personally. And Vandana Shiva often talks about the fact that we are still eating the weapons of the First and Second World War. That's what she means. In fact, when Nixon went to China in 1970, oh, this is now history. When Nixon went to China in 1973 and opened up the relationship, one of the things that the Chinese wanted was for the Americans to build 6 nitrogen factories. Because they knew the science, but they didn't have the technology. It's fascinating. This stuff, nitrogen, is dynamite. It is also how all food is produced, and you'll notice from this slide that after it was produced, the world population exploded. Because out of the same earth, you can get 3 times the crop for a limited period. I'll come to that. The food that you eat is incredibly damaging to the environment if it is not organic. If you go to any shop, regardless of whether it's packed or not, you are eating chemicals. You are consuming food that has been born and bathed and washed and lovingly nurtured in chemicals. That is not sustainable. So one of the messages that I think fair trade has to adopt, looking at what producers do in the south that we work with, is if it's not organic, you may be paying them a good price, but you're destroying their earth, their soil, their future. Healthy soil, which is where we're going to get to, is about sex. Healthy soil we take for granted. That healthy soil hardly exists anymore. Soil takes about 2,000 years for that much of it to form, 10 centimetres. It doesn't just come out of a factory. It comes from rock that is ground down by glaciers, smoothed over by rivers, churned up by Earth's tectonic movements, where organisms start to live, bacteria. Earth is basically full of bacteria. They reckon, no one really knows, there are more living organisms in a handful of healthy soil than there are people on the Earth. And imagine what happens when you pour pesticide on a field of healthy soil. So soil that has been regularly pesticided will lose about 95 to 97% of its life. And what you end up with is dust. And if you want to know what really unhealthy soil is like, look under your garden lawn, because you have created a soil desert. We should be digging up our lawns and planting trees, the ones that Tradecraft will send you when you place an order. Healthy soil is an extraordinary gift, and we are literally wearing it out by bad farming, which is why fair trade is a very important process for southern farmers, because Tradecraft, we now insist that if we're going to buy something from you, we don't want to buy it from land that is being destroyed and thrown away. We want organic. And fair trade that is not organic to me just makes no sense whatsoever. None at all. There's the sex, it's happening all over in front of you. It is a orgy of living organisms doing things together that no scientist understands, but we do know that if we pour pesticides on it, we kill it. This is all a bit grim, isn't it? Don't worry. So I was thinking, what is the message? I've explained why bad farming contributes to poor soil, to farmers not having a future, where even fair trade is irrelevant, but more than that, it's working towards a climate that we can't live in. I know what the answer is, in a way. It's us changing the way we live. We can't expect others to do it for us. We can't expect governments to legislate for us. We have to do it, set the example. I know most of you already do this. So the answer is actually something we've known for a long time. It's local food, it's fair trade food, and it's organic food. And the best would be all three, which is why I think Tradecraft needs to set out to create fair trade local food. That's what I think the future is. We need to be treating local farmers just as we have for 40 years been treating farmers in the global south, as well as continuing what we already do. Don't worry, it's not about forget them, it's all about us. I think this is a necessary extension. So I Googled what local and organic and fair trade food would look like. You know, Google, if you type in some words, they give you images. So I looked for local food first, and it's the picture on the right that came up. Yeah. That's what people think of when they think of local food. It's your local supermarket. Supermarkets are the devil. I'm sorry, I have to say that. 95% of the food sold in this country comes from the supermarket. Do you know where they get it from? Nobody knows. That's the point. Nobody knows. I read in The Guardian that after Brexit, prices will go up, and the supermarkets will, through efficiency savings, manage to mitigate some of that. Do you know what those efficiency savings are? They'll be right on the farm's doorstep saying, it's not 24p, it's 22p. That's efficiency savings. They make their margin. This is not the future of food. The future of food is organic, it is local, and it is fair trade. And that, for a fair trader to say, is actually, that's heresy. I'm glad I'm with the Quakers because they don't have a creed, and there is no, that's not true either, that's slightly irreligious of me. You as communities, in the zero waste community, you are so far along this track, I simply have to accept that fair trade is way behind you. I do. I mean, thank you for paving the way. Thank you for having the courage to stand up and say, we need to do something about our communities. I respect that. Fair trade has done amazing things. Fair trade is an extraordinary success. When it started 40 years ago, they were absolute crackpots doing it. Fools, idiots, with no hope of success. And yet today, fair trade turns over £9 billion worth of product. That's to be celebrated. I think together we could be even more powerful, which is why I am on a personal mission to try and connect all the people who care about the way we live into a bigger and better movement, or to be a small part of that. The future for us is that we need to eat food, mainly plants and not too much. Some of you may recognise that quote. It's from an extraordinary journalist called Michael Pollan. And if you want to read one book, just one, and speakers always talk about books that changed their lives. The book that changed my life is a book called Omnivore's Dilemma. It is the dilemma of being a race that can eat everything. And if you can eat everything, you do. And we have abused the earth to do so. His advice about the future of food is eat food, stuff that your grandmother would recognise as food, not packages with E numbers, but stuff that you actually know is food. It looks like a courgette, it's a courgette. That box of something looks like, I have no idea what it is, don't eat it. Mainly plants, flexitarianism, and not too much. Makes sense. The future for us as an organisation is to try and find links to local farmers, to encourage local communities not only to sell fair trade goods, but local produce as well that is organic. So, on the left is just a recap. Global temperature since 1850, the middle is 0, 1.5 is the first red line. We're at 1925 now, 1950, 1980, 2000, 2018. The speed of climate change is frightening. It's the speed of it which is frightening. We've got caught out. I would like Tradecraft to be a 1.5 company. So we now know what 1.5 means. It's trying to live in such a way, or be a business that works in such a way, that we are communicating less consumption. Now that's not going to go down well with the FTSE, is it? That's not going to go down well with neoliberal economics, but it is actually the message that we need to be sharing. Consume less and better. Consume less and better. If we do not have that message, we are fooling ourselves, and my daughter will despise me, and all of you, and all of us. Not for your noses, but for something else. Being a 1.5 company also has other consequences. This is slightly tangential, but it's important to me, so I'm going to share it. We at Tradecraft are changing the way we work, because you cannot implement that kind of change by being a classic company with a big boss at the top, and then a set of directors, and then middle managers, and then lots of people who do the work. We are turning our company into a holocracy, which means there is no hierarchy. This is the traditional hierarchy. The red lines, which you can't read, are very amusing. They say things like, the guy at the top is sleeping with the person down right. Down the bottom, they have children who go to the same kindergarten. There's a gay crush in there. Someone knows about corruption with someone else. Real hierarchies are all about power and the abuse of power. We are living a flat hierarchy where everyone is CEO of their own job. It's very interesting, but I believe if we want to live the values, we have to implement the values. And the maximum salary range now between shop floor and big boss is 2.5, which means a lot of people have taken a pay cut, and we are committed to levelling out. It also means we have to start changing the rules. We are rule breakers, we're pirates now. We don't care what noses we put out of joint or what feathers we ruffle. If it means we introduce fair trade milk into the UK, against the wishes of the fair trade movement, yaboo, we're going to do it. We're out looking for good trouble. And I think you are out looking for good trouble too. It's what makes you who you are. I'd love you to be part of, I would like to be part of your journey. I would love you to be part of our journey. And finally, let's be part of the answer, not part of the problem. It's up to us. No one else is going to do it for us. This is the vomit theory of public speaking, where you just pour out everything that's on your heart and on your mind. And I can see visual vomit all over the room, which I now have to clear up afterwards. I hope it made some sense. I really do, because I feel passionate about it, and I know you are passionate. I love this in terms of introducing questions. If you can't read it, this is the UN Climate Change Conference, and a journalist is asking, what if it's all a big hoax and we create a better world for nothing? Let's create a better world. I think it's for something, but even if it isn't, let us do so. That's me, done. I hope it wasn't too long. I hope it captured your imagination. My daughter.
Yes.
Two things. I work, and I've spent 15 years working on fair trade. It's my life. It gave me a nervous breakdown. I kind of assumed that my daughter would say, don't worry, Dad, you do great stuff. My wife works on climate change issues. She actually works in Bonn with the delegates for the Quakers, doing quiet diplomacy behind the scenes, bringing nations together off the record where they can talk personally. It's one of the jobs that the Quakers do. So I assumed that, she'd be quite happy with this. I was kind of hoping for some brownie points. And she came out, she shot out, she said, Dad, make sure every woman who ever works for you earns exactly the same as any man who works for you and does the same job. Do that for me.
Yeah.
Quite right.
Yeah.
And secondly, sort out your packaging. And what I learned from that is she shares the same values as my wife and I, but young people see it through a different prism. We've got the right message. We just need to communicate it, perhaps slightly more relevantly, to a generation that go on Snapchat and TikTok and have converted companies from plastic straws to paper straws without you or I even knowing about it. Power to our children, because they are the future and they are far better at understanding what they need than we are. We are simply servants to help them create the world that they will live in. Thank you. That's all from me. Any questions?
Well, I wondered if you could tell me, because I am ignorant, what has happened to fair trade over the last 18 months or so. I buy fair trade, but I don't follow it. It's just that about 4 years ago I heard a woman on the food programme, this woman who was the leader of fair trade, and she didn't sound very impressive to me.
So there's a difference between fair trade and tradecraft. Tradecraft invented it back in the 1970s. We did the first trips out to producers, and when the idea took off, we co-founded something called the Fair Trade Foundation, which is the organisation that has that label that you see everywhere. Effectively, brilliant marketing plan. We invented the best concept in centuries and gave it away. It's a bit like Bill Gates inventing Windows and then just saying, actually, it's so good, we'll give it to everybody for free. So when you give something away, you no longer control it. Tradecraft continues to do fair trade, I think, exactly how it should be, working with small cooperatives. The Fair Trade Foundation created the label, and the vision was to make it available to all, including supermarkets. Supermarkets adopted that because, well, people were buying fair trade. And supermarkets are clever, they can smell money. But clearly, over the intervening 30 years, what has happened is that big supermarkets, big chains, Nestle, and all the ones who caused the problems in the first place, have systematically asked fair trade to change the rules and make it easier. The most classic example of that is Mass Balance. If you buy a fair trade chocolate bar today in the supermarket, there is probably no fair trade chocolate or sugar in it. It works on the basis that the company that buys the cocoa buys 10 tons, and at the end of some complex production line in another country, 10 tons worth of product is labelled fair trade, but there's no physical link. It's Mass Balance. So there's been lots of scandals and questions about where fair trade is going. I can understand why it was good to get supermarkets involved. Personally, that's not the fair trade I believe in. Fair trade I believe in is what we do. Of course, the business model that we have, giving away our greatest idea, meant that we got into trouble financially. We nearly went bankrupt last year because our sales dropped, our supermarkets rose. So any one of you who says, oh, I support fair trade and I buy it in the supermarket, shame on you. Go to that woman's shop and buy fair trade products there. Do not go to a supermarket and think you're doing a good thing. You are not. There, I've broken a rule. I should not have said that. And if you report me to the Fair Trade Foundation, I will get a very angry letter. But it is the truth. Did that answer your question? Not really. Sorry, I just ran.
No, yes, I'm very interested. So when we see the Fair Trade logo, you know, what does that mean?
It means that the producer somewhere has been certified that they are producing products according to the fair trade standards, and that at that point somebody paid them the fair trade price.
Yeah.
What happens to those products afterwards is then lost in the chain of supply, unless you buy from an organisation like Tradecraft or from a BAFTA shop, where they will only source fair trade products that come directly from the producers. So it's like all certification. It's like organics, and even that is slightly weak. The difference, real fair trade is about my relationship with the producer. I know where it comes from, I know what I paid them, I know what they're doing with the money. And commercial fair trade, which is all about volume, where the producer somewhere gets some extra money, but they don't even know who from or why. Or it's not wrong, it's better than nothing, but it's not what we set out to do. So that was, I'm really bad at answering questions, aren't I?
No, you answered it perfect. I want to say one more thing
Yes.
that I will not say anything else. In this fair trade shop here, when you look at things, sometimes, you know, it says only 6.9% of the thing is fair trade.
Yes, so another of the rules that they changed was in composite products. We invented something called the GeoBar. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
It was the first product in the world where different ingredients were put together to create a fair trade product. And all the ingredients were fair trade, the honey, the sugar, the rum, everything. Brilliant idea. And then supermarkets got hold of this and said, well, that's great, but 100% fair trade ingredients, that's really hard because our factory can't get enough rice. So can we just do a bit of fair trade? And the rule is now very complex, but I think it's about 20% qualifies you to have the fair trade label. So you can buy ice cream that has a bit of chocolate in it, and the rule is everything that can be fair trade has to be fair trade, and if you can prove that. So you get these weird things where very little fair trade in there. Our policy is everything that can be fair trade is fair trade, and we source it ourselves. Okay, this question there.
And I just wondered if there's any other 1.5 companies out there that we would know about.
I've not heard of one, and I want to be the first. I want to be a leader. Tradecraft was a leader. I don't think the concept has taken off, and I want to be the first to create the concept. And if people want to copy, that's fine. But if you want to support the world's first 1.5 company, take a brochure, order what you want, give it to Vicky, and buy it from her in the shop. Because BAFTs, the British Association of Fair Trade Shops, these are shops that do it right. So do not go to the supermarket, go to them. And hopefully when I come back in a year's time, there will be more 1.5 companies. But you are really the first to hear about this message. I want to get out there, around the world, telling people we need 1.5 companies as well as 1.5 people.
How long have you been with Tradecraft for?
About 2.5 years. I've been.
And have you just started, is it just in that time that you've sort of turned, the Tradecraft's turned attention to being a 1.5 company?
Yeah. Yes. Organic has always been a part of the fair tradecraft story. I'm not claiming that, but I think the urgency to become a 1.5 company is we can't wait. We can't wait for committees to agree that it's a good idea. We just have to do it. And I don't really know what it means, which is why I say we have to organise ourselves differently and break rules. Because I don't know exactly what it means. I'm just determined to be it. That's how pirates started. They didn't go out thinking on the 13th of August we'll intercept that Spanish galleon. They just went out looking for trouble. And we will cause trouble wherever we can. Question answer.
Yeah, we all know about Monsanto, and we all know about the supermarkets and the way they exploit the commercial aspects of trade justice. What about the EU with the sort of draconian FTAs and tariffs and all that sort of thing, especially if you're in Bonn?
Every trading bloc will use its power to extract maximum value for its citizens. That's what the EU does.
Yeah.
That's what Britain will try and do on its own if it leaves. Britain won't have the same power as the EU and will probably, for the first time in its trading history, on the wrong side of the table. That's something we're not used to. And while I don't criticise the EU for being any different from any other, what I do praise the EU for is that they have introduced innumerable safeguards on the environment and worker legislation that I'm not sure the British government would have. I was talking to a group last week who worked, a guy there works on climate quality, and the EU wanted to introduce a soil quality directive, which would have ensured minimal use of pesticides, all the stuff I talked about. There were only 2 countries in Europe that objected and formed a bloc that was able to stop it. Can you imagine which 2 might they have been, or one of them? Yeah, it's Britain. Britain and the Netherlands, which has a very heavy farming imprint. So, yeah, we can criticise the EU, but I think they have more of a balanced view on world trade and environmental issues than certainly this current government. I've just broken another rule. I've been political. Sorry. I'm not unapologetic about that. But when I look at what the British government tries to do on trade, I'm grateful for the EU, I have to say, even though they're not good. And I say that with respect. The question here.
Just with things like bananas and pineapple, which is like, you know, a product, isn't it? It's not manufactured. So when they have fair trade, is that fair trade?
Yes, there are certain products that have to be from origin. Bananas, coffee, I think almost all the rest can disappear down the chain. No tea, you can retro-certify, which means you go to an auction house in Calcutta, you buy 20 tons of tea at auction. As long as it's come from a fair trade producer group, at some point you can retro-pay the premium, but it's not sold in, it's very complex. Each one of these supply chains is in itself a science. And the problem for fair traders is trying to keep on top of them all. But bananas and certain fruits, avocados I think now you can buy, I'm not sure. We're not very good on fresh fruit because it's not our business. But coffee, you have to get from origin direct. That's fair trade for sure.
But just on that, there was something on the news a while ago about Sainsbury's. They were changing the way they dealt with fair trade with tea. They wanted to somehow take it in-house. I didn't quite understand what they were doing.
They didn't want to pay...
It was kind of a bit of a con, really.
Yeah, it was. They didn't want to pay the full fair trade price. They objected to sending all these premium amounts to producers not really knowing what happened to it. So they decided to set up their own scheme called Fairly Traded. And there's a big outcry, but they've done it. Their tea is no longer fair trade, it's fairly traded. But this is what supermarkets do. They see a brilliant idea, they make money out of it, and then when it starts to lose its dynamism, they cut corners, and eventually it's meaningless. That's just the way supermarkets are. That's the way they work. Yes?
the great British public, on the whole, think they're buying fair trade from these supermarkets when they buy these products which just have this label on. How would you suggest that we distinguish ourselves as a fair trade shop? Because we use the same logo.
I think it's a real challenge. If you're using the same logo, everyone assumes the same values. I think it's a real problem. And I don't know what to advise. I've not cracked that one myself. I think, I wish I could give you the answer, but there isn't an answer. Education's hard. You've come out on a Tuesday evening and it's hot and you're amazing people, but the great British public will not do that. It's very hard to communicate such complexity. A label is a brilliant thing. Oh, it's fair trade. That's why it works. And I do not have the answer. I wish I did. But it would be great if the community who don't work in your shop were to make it a point to tell all their friends to buy in that shop, because once you experience a fair trade shop and understand the stories behind the product, that's encouraging for the shopkeepers and for the volunteers. It also introduces, through personal conviction, the belief that this is fair trade and that might not be. We are ambassadors and evangelists to our friends in a way that a label isn't. Yeah. So if you don't buy, who doesn't buy yet from a fair trade shop? I'm going to shame you all. Because you should, yes. So was that a question or something?
It's a comment. If then all the supermarkets don't have the footfall and we all go to these other shops will not have enough products, they'll have to grow big, and then believe me, they'll do exactly what the big shops do, because they'll be a big shop.
Maybe.
I may be cynical,
Yeah.
but that's the way it is. And unless governments do something about this, nothing is going to happen. And putting the guilt onto us as individuals isn't feasible.
Yes and no.
I'm cross.
No, yes and no. The history of slavery. Slavery was abolished eventually because the government took a decision. But how did they get there? 50 years of boycotting by individuals, particularly housewives, who in the first year boycotted the West Indian sugar industry and brought its industry to their knees. Governments will do what they think will cause least anger. They will look after their own position. If individuals let it go, they will do the easiest thing. If individuals take a stand, governments take notice. It's why I support Extinction Rebellion. I'm not a campaigner, not an activist in that sense, but what they're doing is brilliant, because it's bringing it to their government's attention. And I know the government's got other issues on its mind at the moment, and you can see how important climate change is to the government just now. If it's not us, it ain't anybody else. And I'm not putting guilt on you, I'm saying you have the power to change. Sorry if it came across as guilt, and I like shaming people for not going to fair trade shops. Let me encourage you to go to a fair trade shop, because your behaviour is the one thing that supermarkets fear. They do not fear governments, they fear your behaviour.
It's simplistic, Chris. I just can't see it. I've been doing this for years. Where you put your money is where the power is. So if you only spend your money on what you believe is well, that does work to a point.
Yes, to a point.
But only to a point.
Yeah, only to a point.
We can't, as individuals, I do not believe, change anything much. Because there's so much power out there.
Yeah, there
Do you
is.
not think there made a difference about apartheid?
I think
People that
Do
boycotted
you not
goods
think
from South
though
Africa.
that sometimes I understand exactly
Yeah,
where
I
you're coming
understand.
from with that point, when they did, sorry, I can't see you, and I have some sympathy with it, but I do think things are not always, although time is against us with climate change, things are not always revolution, they're sometimes evolution, and I just wanted to make the point, is it so bad, I don't know the answer to this, that somewhere like Sainsbury's is putting fairly traded on? If it's a lie, it's bad. But if it means that it's an evolution in the way in which they look at their buying and they're looking at things, then maybe it has had the effect, because people are asking for fair trade things and being more. So I don't think that's entirely naive, although I think that they'll always look for where the fast buck is. You know, they're business people. But I do think that there is a power which grows gradually through people having this sort of approach.
Initially, Sainsbury's wanted to get rid of all fair trade products. They started with tea, and the outcry was so great from individuals that they stopped it at tea.
I think the
It's a compromise. We want something. It's not bad, and I absolutely understand. There are days when I just want to give up. There are days when I really
I don't give up, but I'm not convinced about
I think also it's changing
How to
the
do
life.
it.
Sorry,
Yeah, how to do it. Sorry, question here, sir.
Well, I think the question, but we do need to recognise that fairly trading is a deliberate deception. It just is straightforward.
If you didn't hear, Jim was saying that fairly traded is a deliberate deception.
It's intended to be so.
I think it's a very interesting point. What can we achieve? I'm just encouraging us to be a bit bolder and braver, and specifically to support people who really are making the effort. People like Tradecraft, people like these people are putting their money and their neck on the line. So if you doubt whether it's efficacious, ask them, because they'll tell you it is. In terms of lady at the back, and then two here, and then maybe we'll stop because I don't want to bore you.
I think it's a fantastic idea what you're trying to do, and I come from a sort of fair trade background into this system rather than the carbon neutral. But my worry is that by the time we try to do 1.5, does that mean sustainable in consumer language, local plus fair trade plus organic? When literally, as a human being, try to do the right thing, I don't know whether to go to the farmer's market,
Yes.
which is not fair traded, but it might be organic,
Yeah.
but it's definitely local. Or do I come to the shop? Or
Yes.
I just don't know which way to go.
Go wherever you can to do the best, and there is no perfect answer. I mean, really, I get that same problem as well. I cycle around Newcastle the last 2 Saturdays trying to find zero waste, and in the end I gave up. I'm trying to do the right thing, and I will fail as often as I succeed. This isn't a law. All I'm saying is, as a company, we need to challenge people. We need to challenge ourselves. There isn't a perfect answer, and we are on a journey. Two questions.
Can I pitch in with that?
Please.
I think one of the things to say is don't buy anything that's flown in.
Yes.
It's not just about food miles, because if it's come by boat, it's
How do you know?
immeasurably better. So
How do you know it's flown in or come by boat?
this is a tricky problem. There's some things that you can know. Bananas will always come by boat. Can you help me out, Jemima, with what else comes by boat? But certain things you know, certain things that are very perishable, like blueberries, if they come from Peru, they're flown.
Yeah.
You know, they don't last in your house more than a couple of days, they're flown in. Flying is an incredibly wasteful, flying food in is an incredibly wasteful way of doing it. And I'm afraid that goes for flowers as well, and even fair trade flowers. Always buy local, buy a veg box that's organic.
Yeah.
Start with that. Yes, if you want to.
How Bad Are Bananas is a great book by Mike Berners-Lee, who does carbon footprinting, measuring the carbon footprint of different things. He's an expert from Lancaster University, and he's wanted to know, should he be eating bananas or not, and that's where he started. And the good news is that they have a really low carbon footprint. So I enjoy one with my breakfast every morning because they come by boat. But there are other things like strawberries in winter, which are flown in from California, which have a really high carbon footprint. So eat seasonally, eat local if you know it's local, and as you say, eat organic. Organic box schemes around here include Organic Pantry, Riverford, and less local national company, Able and Cole. But Organic Pantry is just the other side of Wetherby. They're local, they try to source locally.
They do stand at the farmers market as well.
And they do at the farmers market. So, you know, if you know that's a local source.
But one of the best things you can do, one of the things that I did, is to read about it, because if you're coping with what on earth, where does my carbon footprint come from, that the banana book will really give you a sense of where you can make the wins. I was not eating apples that came from the other side of the world, and then when I realised they came in by boat, I thought, actually, you know, I can eat apples in winter without feeling bad about it, but I'm not going to have strawberries.
2 last questions, and then I thank you for your patience.
I was just going to say, it seems to me that making very explicit the link between fair trade and climate change is still a fairly unusual thing to do. 2 questions. One, do you agree with that? And if you do agree with that, how can we change that? I mean, I've told you the organisation that I was linked to earlier. It's just beginning to make that link. but I think it's doing it really still far too slowly.
It's making it far too
How would
slowly.
we do it?
Yeah, how do we do it? I'm willing to go and talk to anybody at any time, at any talk, but it needs more than that. There is a network of fair trade organisations. Jeremy's here from Shared Earth in York. He shares, I think, many of the things that we've been talking about this evening, though I won't speak for him. I think the Fair Trade Network needs to get its act together here, and that's partly our responsibility, and we will do so.
Jeremy, say that next week is the conference of the World Fair Trade Organisation, which has members in 75 countries, I think, it was responsible for setting up the 10 principles of fair trade. At the moment, principle number 10 is the environment. Hopefully, after this conference, due to a resolution that's going through, the environment will no longer be number 10. It is going to change its name to climate crisis and protecting our planet, and it will become principle number 2 in the fair trade movement. So it will have a top priority, and that will filter through to organisations like BAFT, which is a member of the WTO, and then to fair trade shops. So that will be an immense change in fair trade.
Thank you. And Jeremy proposed that. So, final question. Sorry, did you want to ask a final question? No. Then I would like to thank you very much.